Welcome to the Recover You podcast. I'm Kylene.
And I'm Patrick.
We are a couple in recovery
from sex addiction
and betrayal trauma. Together, we share our story to encourage you on your journey. It's here that we talk about sex addiction, betrayal trauma, mental, emotional, and physical health, faith, and anything and everything needed to recover you to your most authentic self that God created you to be. Well, welcome everyone to another episode of Recover You. Patrick and I are very excited. In fact, I think Patrick might be fanboying a little bit today. He's really excited. I am too, I'll have to admit. So we're very excited to have Nick and Michelle Stumbo with us on the podcast today. So Nick is the executive director of Pure Desire Ministries, a parachurch organization that provides hope, freedom, and recovery from sexual brokenness. He and his wife, Michelle, began their own healing journey 8 years ago and have since been working with men and women in the area of sexual health and purity. Nick and Michelle are gifted communicators who combine their own story and God's word into compelling messages on lasting freedom and change. Nick has authored 2 books, Setting Us Free, his personal story of redemption, and Safe, Creating a Culture of Grace in a Climate of Shame. Welcome. We are so happy to have you. Thank you for being here today. And I have to say, Nick, you may know this, you may not know this, and you're on the podcast every single week. So you probably don't, all of the listeners that listen to you guys probably don't get a chance to say this to your face about what a difference you guys have made in our recovery journey and how comforting and safe and encouraging it feels to hear your voice on that podcast every week. So it does mean a lot that you're here today. So we're so glad to see you.
Yeah, well, we're glad to be here and always glad to share a little bit of our story. And it's been great getting to know you guys and have that connection. And Michelle doesn't get to do as many podcasts as I do, so she's probably a bit more nervous, but it's always great when we get to do stuff together.
I think this is my third one.
Only your third?
You've done more than 3. Come on.
We are so honored.
I've done speaking engagements, but
Sure.
I think this is only my 3rd or 4th podcast.
Oh my gosh. Well, we are so honored to have you here. Thanks for being here. Well, if you're okay with that, let's just start with a little bit of your personal story of addiction and recovery and betrayal and kind of what brings you here.
Yeah. So our story, I grew up in a Christian home, a pastor's family, really a good family, strong connection. But like most Christian homes, never really talked about sex or lust. My dad had the birds and the bees talk with me when I was maybe 9, 10 years old. But that is the only time I remember hearing anything about sexuality. And so when I was exposed to some adult content at a friend's house, maybe at 10 or 11 years old, there was just a lot of secrecy and shame around, I shouldn't have seen that. That was wrong. But I also don't want to tell mom and dad because they might not let me go to that friend's house. And so it created this paradigm where sexual things were secretive and shameful. And that kind of became the framework on which my experiences were then built when I got later into high school and found access first to magazines. And then as the internet in the late 90s was becoming more common, finding some of those same pictures for free. And very early kind of having this binge purge struggle with pornography because I wanted to honor God. I believed it wasn't healthy or right or good. And so every time was the last time, and I never kept a secret stash, would, get rid of anything I had found or purchased and promise, God really at that point, just between God and myself, okay, never again. That was it. This was a stupid thing. It was that one time. Well, as is so often the story, that one time kept happening, and found the courage then at a few places. I confessed to my high school youth pastor, a summer camp counselor, my dorm floor leader at the Christian Bible college we would attend. And in every circumstance, the people I found, I had a similar experience where they offered grace, love, prayer, and kind of a blessing of okay, go and try harder not to do this. And I don't know if they ever said try harder, but that was the message of man, thanks for confessing and now go and stop doing it. And that was always my intent. And then whether it was a week or a month or a year, I would still fall back into it. Well, I shouldn't say a year. In that season, it never would have been probably more than a month. So this is all continuing when Michelle and I meet at our Christian college. We date for 3 years. And then as we are in engagement, we have a chapel speaker at our Christian school who talks about, hey, before you get married, you really owe it to your future spouse to air your dirty laundry. They should know when they say I do, what they're saying I do too. And they shouldn't be surprised after marriage. And I'm like, that seems reasonable. That's only fair. And I had never shared to that extent with her. And so took her out on a date and just kind of opened up, hey, here's my history. Here's my struggles with pornography. And was as honest I'd ever been with someone probably in that moment. And that's where you can maybe share a little bit about what that experience was like for you that night and what you remember saying to me about it.
Yeah, I didn't know we were going to have this deep, serious talk. I thought we were going out for coffee. And then we didn't even get out of the car.
I don't think we ever got the coffee. You didn't feel like it after I saw that.
I was actually really surprised just because the way Nick had led our relationship was, in devotions, and he was just this spiritual leader that I'd always been longing and looking for. And there had been a previous chapel where some guys had spoken on how they had addictions, or not addictions, but had struggled with pornography. And I was like, oh, I'm glad Nick doesn't struggle with that. And so he's sharing this, and I'm just like, how did I not know? But then I also, being naive, thought, well, I've seen the books, Every Man's Battle. Every guy struggles with this, probably every guy before, marriage, especially if they've, stayed pure and saved that for marriage, they're going to struggle. It's just a guy thing. Once they're married, it'll all go away, was kind of my, thought. Thanks for sharing. I kind of want to run away. I didn't really know what to do. I was like, okay. At one part of my brain was run, this is too much. And then the other part was be rational. Every guy struggles with this. He's a good guy. It'll be different once we're married.
Do you remember saying to me that night, can't you just promise me you'll never do that again?
Yeah. Why can't you just promise me?
Yeah. And that was kind of a pivotal moment when I look back, because I remember her asking me that. And I said, well, I really want to make you that promise, but I feel like I've made that promise to God, myself, and others many times. And I'm going to try really hard. And I really don't want to do this, but sometimes it creeps back in, and I'm just afraid that will happen. So I don't know if I can make you that promise, because I didn't want to make a false promise. And looking back, I was already using the language of addiction or compulsive behavior, acknowledging this had a hold on me that I didn't know how to break, but I would have never used that kind of terminology. So we entered into marriage, had a great, physical relationship. And for both of us, the first time of experiencing sexual intimacy, and that did not fix the problem. There was definitely benefits to that relationship, but I was on my own still in that binge purge every few months, struggling. And because I'd been honest before marriage, because she knew about the pattern, I felt like I needed to keep being honest, and probably not every time, because I'd be overly stating my honesty, but to some degree, coming back a few times a year to say, hey, this has happened again. I'm working really hard, and this is why this time was a little different, and it's not going to keep happening. And I promise it's going to get better. And did that pretty much off and on for 10 years. Mm-hmm. In the midst of that, I became the lead pastor of a church at 26 years old. And that pressure of, man, I'm the guy and people need to see me as the guy, so I can't tell anybody else. Well, Michelle knew. So she was the one safe person who knew. And in that season, we would have no context of really, I was creating this tremendous burden and trauma and pain for her, because all I saw was my own behavior. Well, this is about me. It was way before I met you. It's not about you, so you shouldn't be that mad. And yet on her side, it really was kind of destroying the fabric of our marriage and our trust and our intimacy. So it was at year 10 where we had kind of reached a breaking point in that, because she was just so tired of the repeated confessions without change, and was starting to get more serious about, I don't know if I can be around you and all this pain that you're causing me. And so we had built all these guardrails of I won't be on the computer alone unless it's for work. I won't watch TV alone, and just build the boundaries so high that I would never act out. Only I knew that nothing on the inside had really changed. And so that fear of, what if I'm at the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong motivation? Will I make this choice again and ruin my marriage? Because it was at that point. And in the middle of that season, we attended a conference for our district of pastors, and they had brought in Dr. Ted Roberts and Pure Desire Ministries. And they made this incredible presentation to pastors to say, if you're struggling and it doesn't involve other people or illegal content, we want to help you get free of pornography We want to keep you in your job, work with your elder board to stay in ministry, and we want to pay for a big chunk of the process. And it was like a ready-made offer for where we were at. And you would think I'd be running down the aisle like, free at last, free at last. Thank God I can be free at last. But I was so stuck in the rationalization and the minimization to say, well, last time it had been a good 2 months. Last time was the last time. And I've got all these boundaries. I'm good. And so I sat there thinking, well, I hope the men in the room who are really struggling listen to this, because this is a good offer for them. And I was ready to let the offer pass me by. But thankfully, in God's wisdom and providence, I was not sitting there alone, which at many pastors' conferences I was. I would have been there by myself. Michelle would be home with the kids. Mm-hmm. But at this conference, she's sitting next to me. And while I'm hearing all these reasons not to go, you can share about what that moment was like for you.
Yeah, I remember I heard Pure Desire was coming and I was like, well, I'm going to come to that, because I think I was probably teaching at the time. So I don't usually, have those times off, and I'm like, I'm coming. I'm going to make this happen. I want to hear what they have to say here, because I had like pretty much zero hope at that moment. Like, if it happens again, like I don't think I'll be able to recover. Like, it's just too much. So I was sitting there and I was like, oh, this is great. This is the answer to our prayer. Why is he not running up the aisle? Like, I think I was crying. I went up and they asked like at the end, they were like, anyone who wants prayer? So I like went up there and got prayer. Like, they didn't ask what for, I was just like in tears. So, yeah, I think God sent me there to kind of like, hey, you need this, buddy.
Yeah, so she's going forward for prayer, and I'm like, oh, I think I'm going to get to go meet Ted Roberts and find out about Pure Desire, because she seems pretty emotional about this. And we did. I always like to share this part of the story, because I think for a lot of men and women that struggle with addiction, there is a lot of shame. There's a lot of parts of it that we don't want to face. It's messy. It's embarrassing. I really drug my feet into recovery. I honestly only went because she wanted us to go. I was kind of doing it to make her happy. And even our first appointment, I think everybody else knew, including her, that we were starting the process, but I was just checking it out. I was just like tiptoeing in, like, well, we'll see.
We'll check it out.
And so I just say, like, if at the beginning of recovery, you're not sure what to expect and you're a little afraid and nervous, like, that's totally normal. And in those meetings, we just started to see a whole new perspective of healing that included understanding what was going on in my brain, how trauma and pain from my past and the lies that I believed because of that were actually the drivers for pornography, not just, kind of the typical thoughts. Well, I'm a male and I have lots of hormones and there's attractive women all over the world and it's hard to resist temptation. I mean, that was the typical piece, but all these other parts about the brain and trauma and false messages were really new and became a life-changing experience as we met with counselors that, believed deeply in the Word of God, understood addiction, and knew what it was like to be a pastor, and walked us through that process of healing. And at the same time, we were required to go to a group. So I had to go to group for the men who were struggling, Michelle for the women who had been betrayed. And I think it was interesting. Neither of us really wanted to go to group for our own reasons. I tried to say, I'm too busy. I told Ted, can't I just meet with you and we figure this out between the two of us? And he's like, no, if you don't do group, you probably won't get better, because you need that community element. You need to hear other men and their stories. And so I was like, fine. And I don't know if you want to share about how you felt about group and what that experience was like for you.
Well, I just was like, why do I need a group? I don't struggle with anything. Like, this is his problem. But I have to, and I think we had 3 kids at the time. Like, I was like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. But going to group for me was just also life-changing, because I didn't realize how much trauma and just different ways I reacted to things or handled things like actually affected our marriage too. And like, I thought we were really good at communicating, but we actually weren't that great at it. Because we weren't speaking like the same language, or even like knowing how to get to the deep stuff. Like, it just takes you to like a whole new level. Or hearing, I think for me, like, I'm not really great at like explaining my feelings or knowing like where they're coming from. I think I'm getting a lot better now that I've been through Pure Desire. It's like, oh, why am I reacting like that? Oh, it's because probably like I was triggered by this. But hearing other women talk about, even though our situations aren't the same, like hearing them say something, I'm like, oh, that's what I'm feeling. Or, oh, I'm not alone in that. Like, oh, you're feeling that and I'm feeling that. Like, we're feeling the same way. And just to have someone else to share this deep struggle with that, like, that has the same like experience was really, really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was for me similar in terms of having other men here. I mean, I had shared before, but like in the Pure Desire group, just the nature of the questions, you get into the nitty gritty details of your story. And honestly, things I had never said to another human being, and you didn't want to, and you'd kind of braced yourself like, okay, here comes the judgment, the shame, the shock, the horror. And instead, when I would just get acceptance and love and affirmation, it really started to thaw that shame and that isolation to think I've got to do this by myself, and realize that no, I can be loved and accepted and find that connection and belonging with other men. And in experiencing that with them, to find a whole new level of intimacy with God and how he felt about me was really a part of it. So it was a really healing and transforming year. And not to say we did all of our work in 1 year and then moved on, but that initial year was definitely a huge part of it.
Yeah.
And it was at the end of that year that I shared a version of our story with our church. I was the lead pastor, and I owned up to having had an addiction to pornography. And then in that sermon, invited people to come and help me start a ministry for people that had the same struggle. And that's really what launched groups in our church for men and for women. We were planning to wait like 6 more months for Michelle to finish her group and start something in our church. But even without announcing it, so many women came up to her and said, what about us? You know, they were, and what was amazing is the men who were ready to start were not the ones married to the women who were ready to start. There were a number of women like, he's checked out, he won't work on this, but if I don't get help, we're not going to make it. So a group of women start, a group of men start, which of course, over time, the husbands of those wives end up in group and the wives of my husbands end up in group. And it just started this whole ministry in our church that we had never planned on, we had never strategized. It's just what God did through our story. Mm-hmm. And we really watched that become the most life-giving part of our church. It really felt like that's where people are being discipled. That's where people are being set free. That's where people are overcoming their issues with God and relationships. And so it grew a lot, and that ended up creating the ongoing connection with Pure Desire Ministries. And then 8 years ago, coming on staff as the executive director and moving down here to Gresham, where we are today. And to kind of fast forward to where we are now, getting to continue using our story and what we've walked through to encourage people to face their story, to get involved in a group, and to work together as a couple, versus just having the addict or struggler think they're the only ones that need help. Mm-hmm. It's really, how do we help the couple heal together has become a big part of what we do.
Thank you for sharing that. Nick, your story is such a 180 from, I don't want to talk about it, I don't want to go up front, I don't want to acknowledge it, to, I mean, now you're heading up the organization and doing podcasts and speaking publicly, and it's like all you do now. When you were going through it, you were having your own personal struggles, but you made a comment as you were describing your confessions and your relationship during the process before it really, you started seeking help for it. That was something to the effect of, why should Michelle be so upset because it's not about her? So I'm curious, at what point when you were going through your own journey of recovery, did that really shift? Because now, you just recorded a podcast on empathy, right? And you talk a lot about communication and empathy and things like that. So at what point do you think that shifted for you, where you recognized how much that actually was impacting her?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that was really what had brought us to the breaking point, because she was there. And I think to hear her using words like separation or divorce, or I can't be around you, or it's not that I hate you, but I hate how this makes me feel. And in God's, timing, it was in that year, where the same year that we found Pure Desire, I kind of feel like he gave me this gift of starting to see her pain. Like, wow, she's so hurt that she would leave me. And that was scary, right? And so I'm like, okay, man, I'm never going to do this again. Well, like a month later, I relapsed. And I think that recognition of, this is crazy. I'm aware that I could lose my marriage and I still did it. Mm-hmm. And in that moment, thinking about having to tell her was maybe the first time I didn't feel like oh, I don't want her to be mad at me. And what about me? It was like, she is going to be so crushed. And I was like, I don't want to have to do this again. But even then, I'm so stuck in the rationalizing and minimizing of we didn't know what else to do. That was kind of our pinch point. We didn't know about Pure Desire. I mean, I'd read the book Pure Desire. I had no idea there was groups and a ministry.
Yeah.
So it was just like, just try harder, build the wall higher, never do it again. And then to have a ministry that's like, this is what we help with. And in that year, I mean, that was a big part of the counseling of seeing her pain, allowing her emotions to be real and not minimizing them or saying, oh, you shouldn't feel that way. It's like, no, I need to hear that. And even if I don't understand why, she might say, this feels like an affair, and wanting to be like, well, that's not fair. It's not real people. It's like, well, no, I need to hear the emotion of, that's what it feels like to you, man. That's terrible. I'm so sorry. And entering into that, I'd say it's part of what God did. And it was a big part of that year of learning to see. And I don't feel like I mastered it perfectly in that year. I think that's still part of growth of learning. Addiction is so rooted in selfishness and, what's in it for me, my ways of escape, my ways of finding pleasure or feeling whatever I need to feel. That recovery is really like a big part of it's learning to feel what others feel and be compassionate and empathetic towards that. So I think it is ongoing, but definitely that year that was a big part of the transformation of, I've got to just quit worrying about what this does to me. I've got to start seeing what this does to her, because that actually becomes a big motive and a big part of the change.
Yeah.
Michelle, for you, any variation of discovery, of confession, of learning these things is really painful. As someone that was married to a pastor who's, looked at a certain way, very well known in the community and in your circle of friends and things of that nature, what do you think? How did you feel going through that? I would imagine that it would make you feel a lot more isolated, alone, like you had to deal with this by yourself. Like you couldn't really, like in these years before you had groups and before he shared his story publicly, that must have been incredibly difficult to deal with that just by yourself.
Yeah, that's exactly everything you said was exactly how I felt. It was like, I can't tell anybody because everyone at church is my friend. And if they're not my friend, that's their pastor. They don't want to, know that. And the people, like when he was the associate pastor, like the head pastor knew and the elders knew. It's like, well, the important people already know that he's working on this. But like I didn't have any. So he had places he could go. I didn't have any place to go. Like, wasn't going to call my parents. I just felt completely alone. And then if he had a relapse, I'd be pretty emotional at worship, but no one couldn't be like, here's why I'm crying or pray for me. And, it was just, it was really lonely and depressing. I think it was causing depression. I don't know.
I would imagine it would. Do you, now that you've gone through recovery and experienced groups and, essentially the world knows your story, right? Kind of like we joke about, like so many people know our story, right? Do you have a different perspective on, because what I heard you say was, I couldn't tell anyone, I wouldn't tell my parents. Like there's certain beliefs I think we have, and I totally understand that, because I think before it happened to me, it's like I think I had such a different understanding even of that world if I understood it at all. Right. And then when you go through it, it's such a different experience. And then when you go through recovery, so do you think, if someone was coming to you right now, do you think it's good for people to tell friends and to have one or two people in their corner? What are your thoughts on that now?
I mean, if there's people going through it, I think it's easier to share that with them because they get it. I think people, maybe if they don't have that, if they've never had this in their life or struggled with it themselves, I don't know that they can fully understand where you're coming from. They might have a lot of beliefs that aren't true or accurate. And I think I worried about that, when he was going to share with the whole church, here's what we've been doing for the last year.
Yeah. What was that like for you? Yeah, that was, that went from like nothing to everything. Like,
part of me was like so excited, like, oh, finally, like everyone will know and like, that'll be it. And we can help people. And then the other side of me was like, well, what if people think this about him now? Or what if they're like scared of him now? Or, where are they going to be coming from? What false beliefs about pornography and sexual addiction? And, there's a huge spectrum out there of things. Like, what experience in their life are they going to tie to maybe him? And then like, maybe not be our friends, or maybe be like, oh, well, I can't be at a church where a pastor struggles with sin.
Yeah.
I don't know. But it went really well. So that wasn't a problem. But I did, worry about like, what are their reactions going to be? Are they going to be mad at me that I never shared with them? We've been friends for 14 years and I never went there.
Well, I think on my side, it was the number of men that came for help that I would not have guessed were struggling because they were older. Your perception of, they're way more mature. This is something maybe way, way in their past, but not as a 58, 60-year-old, and there'd be very seasoned Christian men that I thought the world of that were saying, man, Nick, I really need this group. And I appreciate your honesty, because I've never been able to be honest about my story. It's like, wow. Yeah, that part of me that then felt like, why was I ever hesitant to tell my story? If I would have known it would help so-and-so in my church, that, man, I like I said, I thought the world of them. I loved them. And, they needed this freedom to tell their story. And the only way they would have done that had I been free with my story. Because if I'd have just stood up and said, hey, we're starting this group for you guys who struggle, I don't think some of these men would have ever showed up, because there is that fear of, there's too much to lose. My reputation's on the line. My wife doesn't know. It's better to ride it out into the sunset and take this to my grave. And I've heard a lot of men say that. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what surprised me, is how many men that I maybe assumed didn't need it really needed someone to go first and open that door to say, we're going to tell our story and we're going to find safe places. And I think that's the part of how I'd answer your question, is that to tell someone else, you've got to kind of know that they're going to be safe and non-judgmental. Yeah. And it's hard to know if they're going to be safe and non-judgmental until you tell them. And so that hesitancy of, I don't quite know how you're going to react to my story, keeps you from sharing, unless, like Michelle said, if they've had the experience, that they've walked through this, they've shared their story, then your level of trust that I think they can receive my story and be safe and not judgmental goes way, way up. But until then, it's like, and I think it's part of why most churches don't talk about it, or people in church don't talk about it, that people can say, oh, this is a safe place. But like, until you know what it is I need to bring up, I'm not sure it's safe or not non-judgmental. So yeah, I think that's something to keep in mind.
It's always hard when you're in separate rooms. Michelle, when it did come out public, because that's such a scary thing, like you were just talking about, and to go from feeling like you were completely alone to now everybody knows your story, and then women are coming up to you, like, are there going to be groups for women? Did you receive some support after that and encouragement, where you felt like you were able to share your story with maybe within the group? Is that kind of where that got connected for you?
Yeah, I think we had 8 or 10 women in my first group, and then we weren't even done with that one, and there was another one already starting. There's a lot of women coming forward, but it was just, I didn't realize, I honestly thought Nick, even though I told myself like every man struggles with this, I was like, Nick's the only one who hasn't figured this out. So it was like, great. Because I was like, oh, okay, let's share our stories. And I was really numb. I kind of like had learned to just kind of like numb all the feelings and like block it, so that you can survive. And so for me, I actually had to do it was different back then. We had 3 books instead of just one big one. So book 1, I had to do twice, because I had so many, like, I didn't know where all the feelings were, or I didn't really have words to put to all the things.
I think your first time through, a lot of your answers were, I don't know. I'm not sure.
I don't know. So just talking with other women and hearing their stories was really helpful. And then just knowing I have someone I can go to, like, if he should relapse again, like, I have someone who can pray with me or hold me up, because I'm not going to make it.
Yeah.
But we did. We made it.
There's a happy ending to this story, everyone. Speaking of that, as you guys sort of started connecting to recovery, I know you guys mentioned that you were pretty much at the end if something didn't change. So what was it that happened in your relationship, and were there specific behaviors, or we already mentioned like empathy a little bit shifting in the conversation and things of that nature? Like, what was it for you that really gave you the hope that this was something that could work out?
I think a lot of it was, there's a bunch of tools in the books, that we had never done, like the faster scale, or I'm blanking on that once, but just having something like to talk about that's not how you're doing. Oh, I'm doing good, but really you're not doing good. Like going down a scale and really like, okay, it looks like you're in like close to relapse here. Like tell me how you're going to get back up to restoration so that you don't relapse. It just was a way to communicate where I kind of knew where he was on the scale, whether I should, be asking him more questions or if he's doing like actually doing good, not just telling me he's doing good. And a big part for me was knowing he was in a group with other men that were going to keep him accountable, like not just at a surface level, but like really keep him accountable and know all the things was huge for me.
Yeah. One of the stories I tell about change was working with Dr. Ted Roberts, and a lot of our sessions, we'd be talking and he'd be really drilling down on procrastination and like, why did you do that? And what do you do when you're procrastinating? And how can you spend so much time on fantasy sports and things like that? At one point, I remember like, okay, time out. What? Like, when are we actually going to talk about pornography? Because I'm here to talk about pornography and you keep bringing up my work habits and procrastination. And that was some clarity where he's like, Nick, the procrastination is always in your story what comes first. And it's because you're starting to avoid pain and situations where you feel like you might not feel good enough, because that was a big part of my internal message system. I'm not good enough. I won't succeed. I'll end up failing, never show weakness. So when I was feeling that, I would procrastinate, and I'm procrastinating. Now I'm wasting time in places I shouldn't be. And it would become this progression that would end in pornography. And so I was seeing the ending point. No one had helped me see some of the starting points that were all rooted in the lies I believed about value, worth, performance, identity, being good enough, measuring up. So I think as we started to dig into that, it was like, oh, this is different. This isn't just try harder. This isn't just more strategies. This is like actually figuring out why I do this, how I'm using it to cope. And if I can have better strategies there, then I don't end up at this place where I'm on the edge or verge of relapse. And so I think that was very different. And kind of what Michelle was saying, I knew how to talk, like we know how to communicate about work and life, but I didn't really know how to talk about my emotions because usually for me, emotions revealed weakness. So it was saying like, I feel like I'm failing, or I'm afraid this person doesn't like me and I'm not good enough. I don't, feel like I'm very good at my job, or this sermon's going to be terrible. It's like, well, I don't want to talk about that because that's kind of a downer and I feel like I'm failing. So I just kind of keep it positive and what that led to in our marriage is she didn't ever really know me, I think, because she didn't get, she could see I was grumpy. She could see I was tired. She could see I was in a bad mood, but I didn't know how to talk about why without feeling like I was admitting failure. And so it taught us through the faster scale was a big part of it, but just the whole process of like, how to be real about our emotions and to connect those two. Man, this ties a lot into my upbringing where I learned about work ethic and that you kind of are what you do. And it's so ingrained in me that if I fail, I'm a failure, that I'm being driven by that fear. And when you start to kind of know that part of someone's story, like, oh, I can see why you're frustrated because this taps into this. And that's a trigger for you because of your relationship with your mom and what happened to you as a kid. And the way that created connection then for us to one another's stories and being able to support one another in places of brokenness and woundedness, rather than just being kind of the recipient of the triggers, like, well, you're mad. I don't know what you're mad about. Drop it. Versus help me understand what you're being triggered by. What was the thoughts and what did maybe I say that tapped into that for you? Because I know that's a big deal. And it just changed the way we talked about our emotions. And again, when you do a podcast, it's easy to be like, oh, Nick and Michelle Stumbo, they do that perfect. I mean, we still struggle with, you had an off day, I had an off day. We kind of got snippy with each other. And every time do we come back around and get to the deeper things? Well, no, not every time. because we have 4 kids and life is busy, but sometimes we do. And there's times we're able to reflect back and see, oh, this is definitely part of what's driving me. And that's just a new level of conversation that we've had because of our Pure Desire groups.
Yeah. Prior to Pure Desire, I would get mad, shut down, not talk to him for a day. And then the next day be like, I'm fine. I'm good. And then he'd be like, no, we didn't. Okay. 3 days a week. I don't know. I'm like, that's just how that's how I grew up learning to solve problems or get through conflict. And that's how I did it. And that was fine. It worked for me, but he's like, we didn't fix anything, so I need to talk this out.
Unresolved.
Yeah, this is crazy that you can just be fine because nothing changed.
Yeah.
So Pure Desire for me helped me identify my feelings and be able to communicate like, okay, like here's why I overreacted. Like like what you said tapped into this, which is coming from over here. And so you got the brunt, just being able to communicate how. And then I don't shut down as much.
Oh, no, not in the same way.
Yeah.
No.
Not in the same way.
Maybe like for
She's
now.
like, that was a question. Please affirm.
I'm like, I'm good now.
Yeah.
No, I get it.
I think we both changed a lot in some of those areas.
Yeah. We both got healthy. I didn't know I needed to get healthy.
I think that's one of the things that this whole process brings up, right? I always think about betrayal is like this flashlight that highlights wounds that we have, and many of them existed before discovery, and betrayal and everything just sort of like brings them up to the surface and says, see, all of those are true. So whatever it was that we carried before, it just emphasizes them, but then it also offers us, when we have 2 people willing to do the work, it offers us this opportunity to really kind of take them one at a time and deal with them and improve. And I think communication is one of those huge things that couples learn, hopefully, through the process, right? They progress, hopefully most couples, and that's a big thing. And when I think about me and Patrick, communication and the amount of talking and getting clear on where the other person is and understanding what's going on in their life and how you're feeling and what does this mean to you, that's so huge in a partnership, I think. And I so appreciate Conquer and Pure Desire, just their emphasis on the layers underneath. And when we talk about addiction, it's like the trauma model versus the disease model, right? I think when we get to all of those layers and the whys and how we feel and how that's all connected, it makes so much more sense, and it brings so much more depth into the conversation and connection and the healing journey. So I totally agree as a betrayed partner, where I was like, at the very beginning, I was like, I don't need to do anything. What are you talking about? This is your problem, right? But little did I know all the stuff that this would bring up for me, that is like, oh, now we need to work on this, and now we need to work on this, and now we need to work on this. And yeah, it definitely changes your life. But in a lot of ways, the coupleship, when they choose to do it together, has the opportunity to just improve so many different areas that may never have been worked on, right? If this type of thing wasn't a catalyst.
Yeah.
Which we would never wish it on anyone.
Right.
But yeah, I see that. Nick, being a pastor of a church and then now shifting into Pure Desire, what was that transition like for you? Was it hard to say, hey, I'm leaving this behind? I would imagine you thought for a long time, hey, what I'm going to do is be a pastor a church specifically, because I would argue you're still a pastor in many, many ways. And having a huge reach and outreach in that way in a ministry. But I'm sure it was a difficult decision, in a sense, letting go of one dream and stepping into another. So what was that like for you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yes and no. There was, in those years, as we're now starting groups at our church, and on a few occasions, Pure Desire would have me come to an event and get to speak, or a few other churches like in our denomination were aware of my story or because of the book, and I'd get to go share at a conference or a men's group. And it just felt like I'd come home and say, that was so life-giving. It just feels like God's using it. It's sparking all these great conversations. And, sometimes church work can be a little like, well, there was another sermon and another week, and did anything happen? And so we were paying attention to that. And when the opportunity, I certainly didn't have any designs personally, like, I'm going to go work for Pure Desire. because we were seeing the fruit of it in our ministry. And that was the thought of, well, let's just keep helping the local church do this. And then Pure Desire comes and says, hey, our founder, Dr. Ted Roberts, has Parkinson's. Would you consider becoming the director? And it was like, it just felt like one of those things God had been doing and had been leading us to. And we obviously took time to think about it and pray about it and talk it over, but it just like made sense in our life and in our story that this is what God is doing, and let's go be a part of this. But at the same time, we loved our church. It was the place we had moved as kids out of college and had our own kids and grown together, and the church had grown with us. And it was like, why would you leave a church that loves you and you love them? Because there's so many churches that's not the case, where, you know, pastors just have really tough experiences. And so that was hard, of, you know, leaving a community that had been our home, and we really shouldn't leave something like that. But it was just feeling God's call and his leading. And, you know, I still miss the routine of getting to preach to people that know you and having sermons. And I know the podcast and Pure Desire can be some of that, but it is different than getting to stand in front of a group and bring the word of God and have that role in your life. I very much miss that. I will say I don't miss some of the other pieces of, whether it's church politics or building issues, or, you know, the deacon board that wants one thing and the trustees want another, and you're getting in the middle. Like, there's just church stuff that we all see, and I don't necessarily miss that. But yeah, leading a local congregation is definitely a privilege, and pieces of that are very different. So I miss that, and God, I just trust that God knows that, and he knows our heart's desires, and he's at work to meet them and bring about a fulfilling life in whatever we're doing. So we definitely feel that call. You know, people ask me like, oh, well, you're going to go back to the local church. And I say, you'll have to ask God that question, because he called us to Pure Desire, and he hasn't let us know that he's changing that call. And I mean, he could change it tomorrow. He could change it 20 years from now. But until he does, this is what we're called to. And there is a lot of fruit that we're getting to see as it impacts lives. So.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And with your personal recovery history and being a pastor and now working with Pure Desire, I know that you have a particular interest in educating churches around this topic, around recovery and betrayal and addiction. But you're also very familiar on, you know, the common things that well-meaning, kind people do in churches that are maybe more hurtful than good, or the lack of awareness or education that many of the churches have. And I know that you and Pure Desire are doing a lot to try and overcome that. Can you maybe talk about some of the mistakes that churches make, and then also what resources are available for them?
Yeah, a couple of things that come to mind. I think churches can inadvertently or intentionally talk about this topic as that problem for those people. We assume there's a small group of people that really struggle, and we do want to help them, but most of us are okay. When the truth is, if we are all made by God as sexual beings, and we're all born into a sinful, fallen world, we all have some degree of brokenness in our sexuality, and we are all in need of some healing, some discipleship, some redemption. And to encourage pastors, because as soon as you talk about that problem, and if you've got that issue, we've got this group for you. Well, no one wants to be a part of that group, because I have to admit that I have that problem. And the challenge is I might be sitting next to someone that has no idea I have that problem. So how do I go sign up for that group without acknowledging to the people that don't know I need that group? So it just keeps people from recovery versus saying, hey, we're all in need of healing, and we need to be discipled, and here's a discipleship opportunity. And yes, there are places like a Pure Desire group that are highly specific and really are there when someone acknowledges, I have a need and I need to go through a significant process of change. But people aren't going to get there unless there's a funnel that makes this a normalized conversation, just something that's healthy and a part of our growth and discipleship. Then they might have an opportunity to end up in the group that will actually create transformation. So it's just seeing it as too limited of a problem, and not, I would say, not integrating sexuality with spirituality. That we see it as kind of an outlier. I was just talking to someone today to say we think of like sex over here on the corner, and then everything else in the Bible and church is over here. And once in a while we need to like go talk about this little piece, but you know, it's like we make it weird and we'll get all the kids out of the room, or it's like all this pre-warnings versus what if this is just part of being a human being, and that normalizing the conversation to say we need help to grow and mature. That was one of the things that made a difference in my story was rather than seeing myself as like sinful, evil, bad, and I do believe it's sin, so I'm not trying to question that. But that's the only framework I had, was I was sinful and wrong and I needed to stop it, versus a mindset that says a lot of this is immaturity. A lot of this is a lack of growth and someone helping me to grow in this area. And so I think if churches could talk about it more from that lens of, hey, when we're kids, we do things kids do, and we shouldn't shame a kid for thinking and acting like a kid. What we do is we train them and we create discipleship opportunities for them to learn and grow. Only no one is doing that in the church. Mm-hmm. Pastors aren't being discipled in this area, and they're not discipling their people. So I think that's a huge starting point, to just say, how do we make this a part of growing in our faith, growing in Christ, and just help one another mature into healthier ways of thinking, believing, and behaving in our sexuality? So I think those are some of the things that would help. The last one I'll say is that we make this so big and scary that we think we shouldn't even touch it. In fact, I've had more than one pastor say to me, we are afraid if we address the topic of pornography, too many people would need help. So we haven't done anything.
Oh, wow.
And it's like, wait, you think it'd be too many people, so your answer is do nothing. And there is a part of us like, it's too big, it's too scary, so just go to the professional. And there is a role for professional counseling and for people like Pure Desire that can come alongside and help. But at its basic level, this is something the church can do, because what is most needed is safe connection and relationship and belonging. And the church is more suited to create that in safe, small group environments than any place on the planet that I know of. Way more than AA groups, way more than any social club. Like, the church is the place for this to happen. And I think if a church could see, hey, if we just create a little bit of healthy structure, give it a little bit of publicity, we can do this. We don't have to be experts. And yeah, when the more gnarly, difficult situations come up, we have experts that we can call and say, hey, what do we do with this one? That's good. But the majority of what's needed is just that safe community, that pathway to say, it's okay to struggle with this in our church because we have a plan to help you. And if churches would see doesn't require some PhD degree in sexuality, it just requires a heart to help, then we could do a lot. So Pure Desire has group resources for men, for women, for those who are the struggler, and those who are the betrayed. And we have an introductory video series. I know many churches, and you guys have used a lot of the Conquer series, which is where we started, because Dr. Ted Roberts was on it. And then we filmed our team teaching introductory materials for Pure Desire called Sexual Integrity 101. So it's our 101 class, and it's 8 weeks long, and anyone could watch that streaming on our website or get DVDs. And that can be a great place for a church, an individual, or a couple to start to just understand, to be equipped. What is this area? What's addiction? What's going on in the brain? And then what does my next step look like? So all of that is at our website at puredesire.org. People can find out pretty much everything there. And then on our podcast, as you've alluded to, today we recorded episode 381. So wow. In that many episodes, we've probably covered, if you're thinking about it, we've probably covered it.
Yep.
So, go to the little magnifying glass and type in your phrase, and it'll probably pull up a podcast on whatever you need some more information on. And that can be a great resource as well.
It is a great resource. We will second that. I did watch the Sexual Integrity 101. I went through most of the Conquer series to understand the content. And I mean, it's really wonderfully put together. And I think did Rodney allude to a new project coming out for teens or youth pastors as well down the road?
Both. Actually, we're doing our parent training series will be a digital video course. So Rodney and Tracy Wright have traveled around and done their parenting course, and now that'll be available digitally on our website. So it'll take their book, How to Talk with Your Kids About Sex, which is all about creating a healthy culture in the home for openness and support. Mm-hmm. That'll be video content. And then we're creating a free resource library for youth pastors and parents, but primarily aimed at the youth leader and the pastor, just to equip them to be that voice of help to the youth group. Mm-hmm. So that'll be coming out. Probably the parent training should come out with our summit in September, and the youth leader resource probably about a month after that. So yeah, this fall, 2 new things that can just try to equip people to have those conversations with their teens and the kids in their life.
I really almost feel like there's a revolution of sorts, maybe in the past 5 years or so, with the amount of content and books and things that are coming out around this topic. People are writing books around sexuality in the church and around addiction and around betrayal. And I don't know if you kind of have seen that as well. But it also, just the amount of information that Pure Desire alone has been able to put out has been so phenomenal. And I always get excited to hear about what you guys are coming out with next. So that's very, very cool. And it's just, you've taken some things and made new versions or improved them or added to. I know Betrayal and Beyond, you had adjusted and improved recently as well. So we just really appreciate, the level of work and commitment that you put into educating and supporting and helping people heal from this.
Yeah. Well, we're here to help. We want to be a voice that says you're not alone, and there's resources to provide good, solid help.
Yeah, we were so thankful to find resources where people did share their story. That meant a lot to us when we were starting to go through it. It just offered so much hope and encouragement to know that there's, a path through, and there's the end where, life still exists, I guess you would say.
Yeah.
So just to wrap this up today, a question that both of you might answer individually. Is there one thought, recommendation, or piece of encouragement that you would like to leave with the listeners today?
You want me to go first? Second?
Do you need time to think, or what?
I'm sure there is lots to say. Go ahead.
I think one of the things I would say that is most helpful to keep in mind, whether you're at day one of your story or year 2 or further, is to keep in mind that this is a process, and it's a growth kind of area. It's not about arriving or being done. And I think when we start, we just want to know, well, when does this end? And we're maybe talking about the pain or the difficulty. And I think there can be an end to the pain. There can be an end to the strife. But in terms of the process, this is something we continue in, and we have to continue staying open to, how do I need to learn and grow and guard against my past? And if we're willing to see it that way, as I'm on a journey of learning and discovering more of who God made me to be, how that intersects with my sexuality, and how to avoid the old patterns I used to fall into, then I think we're set up for a life of growth and health, versus what I can see. And sometimes in Christianity, we can set this up of like, well, when will I be pure? And we want to get to that moment like, okay, I'm all done now, I'm pure and I'm good to go. But as soon as we do that, I think we're susceptible to stuff sneaking back in and feeling like, oh my goodness, I can't tell anyone that this has come back because I'd be so, and then we're just really caught in the cycle that we were in before. And so staying in that place of being on a journey, being in process, continuing to learn and grow, whether you're 1 or year 14, is really vital, and it keeps us open to what God wants to do next. So that's something I would encourage everyone to keep in mind.
I think I have a couple things. I think it's okay if just one of the people in the couple chooses to start. Like like Nick said, some of the women started first and then the men joined. Some of the men joined first and then the women joined. And sometimes one of them didn't join, but like, the group will help you become a healthier version of yourself. And hopefully that will affect your relationship, even if they don't get help. Like, so don't feel like, oh, I can't go because he's not going, or when's he going to go? Like, just, I guess, kind of focus on your health. And I think as they see you get healthy, like, they're going to be like, maybe I want to check that out. Oh, shoot. And then there was another thing I was going to say. Maybe it was like, you might not be in the same, like, you start groups together maybe, but you don't always, like, it might take longer for one of the spouses to catch up. Like,
you don't go at the same pace.
Nick was feeling like, I'm so good, look how good I am, but I didn't know how good he was doing. Like, It's like, it seems pretty much the same to me. Like,
Right.
I mean, I know you're changing, but like, I can't see all the things that you're doing differently, or, all the ways that you've become a healthier version of yourself, because it was something you hid from me,
It takes time.
He was like, why aren't you so more excited for me? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm just, hoping the shoe doesn't drop over here. So it's okay to kind of not be at the same stage. Like, don't
Yeah.
rush the other person to like be excited or feel a certain way.
Yeah, I think it's really normal for the addict to feel so good right away because they know that they're in healing and they're not doing the behavior anymore. But for the traumatized partner, they're stuck. And it hurts, and they're still dealing with the reality of it. And so that takes a little bit of time, and it is a little bit of a juxtaposition because they're like, I feel great. And you're like, I do not right now.
I'd actually like it if you didn't feel so great right now. Like you should feel some work, right?
That never happened in our house at all. Yeah. Literally, I was like, why are you whistling? You're not allowed to whistle right now. He's too happy. I'm all miserable. Yeah.
Also, I think it was really helpful. Like, I went through the group and then I started leading the groups, and I didn't necessarily want to, but I think that actually helped me to get even more healed. Like, sticking with the group and hearing more stories, leading more stories, staying healthy, staying in it was beneficial, I think. Where I think, a lot of us want to like, okay, we got healed. Okay, that was really great. Okay, now I'm done. But I think part of the process or part of the piece that like why we're still so healthy is because we're still paying it forward and trying to help others. I think that's important to shout out there because it is a long process. But even if you, maybe do a group and then take a break and then do a group, take a break, there's different seasons and people can help in different ways. But I think that that's been really a big piece of our journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it ends up over time translating into personal growth and commitment to keep growing individually and as a couple. And that turns into a lifelong journey that never really ends.
Yeah.
But the journey of recovery is what usually is going to kick that off in these situations. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. We really appreciated talking with you and having you on.
You're welcome.
Yeah, great to see you guys.
Thanks for inviting
Enjoy
me.
the connection.
Woohoo! If you're listening to this, it means you've made it through an entire episode. Part of recovery is spending time engaging in healing and self-growth activities. We are thankful that you chose our podcast to be one of those activities today. Make sure you reward yourself for that accomplishment. If you've enjoyed this episode or this podcast, we would love to hear from you. Please take just a few moments to leave a rating and review, letting us know your experience with Recover You. We not only love hearing how these episodes are helpful, but ratings and reviews help others just like you who are searching for recovery information and support find the podcast too. We can't wait to hear from you. See you next week.